Okay, today we're going to be talking about class relationships, and we're talking about how objects in your code relate to one another. Up until now, we've only had one object in our code. Now we're going to try and have multiple objects in our code. And the way they relate to each other is going to be different, and we'll kind of show you that later on. One way to visualize what that looks like is to use a UML diagram. UML stands for Unified Modeling Language, and it's just some sort of little graph to help you keep track of all of the objects in your code. Here is an example of a UML diagram. Each of these rectangles represent different classes or objects we might have in our code. So in this place we have a customer, and we might have a different types of customers. We might have a corporate customer or a personal customer. And each customer might have an order. Each order might have a customer as well. Now the orders might have an order line, and we have a product here to represent what they're ordering. And these lines between each of these rectangles have different symbols on them to represent the way they relate to one another. For example, a personal customer related to a customer is different from how a customer relates to an order. Now here's an up close of one of the UML class symbols. And in this we can see the very top of the rectangle represents the class name. Then you'll have another section over here. These are all your attributes, and down here at the bottom are all your operations. You might say this is the variables and these are the functions. Now each of the symbols, each of the lines inside your class diagram has a little symbol before it. Now if you have a minus sign, that means it's private. A hashtag means protected. We haven't talked much about protected up until this point, but we're going to show you a little bit more. Then the plus sign means it's public. So in this case, this is private, a private variable. This is the name of the variable, then you have a colon, and then the type. So it's kind of a little backwards from C++, and it's not compiled, so the syntax doesn't have to be exactly correct, but you should know how to read them and kind of translate them into code. So that's why we're showing you some of the details on these. Okay, now when you have, or suppose this is a function here, we know it's public here, and this is the name of that function. It's called POW. Well, this function has two parameters. It has a variable called base, a parameter called base, which is a double, and a parameter called exponent, which is also a double. Now that ends the parentheses. Over here we have what this function is going to return. So let's kind of show you an example of a UML and how it relates to the code. Here we have minus name colon string. Over here for the C++ code it would say private, and we have string name. Oh, I forgot to mention one. If it's underlined, it means static. Static means it's a shared variable amongst all instances of the class. And so this one's underlined, so it's static. Over here we have static int instances. The constructors don't have a return type. We know they're used to build new objects. So here's an example of a constructor. We have a plus sign because it's public. Down here we can see it's public. The name of the class is person. There's person. And then we have a couple of parameters in here. String name, double height, int weight, and then there's no return type. Now the reason they have this weird syntax and denoting it like this instead of like C++ is because UML diagrams are generic across all programming languages. So even if the person's not coding in C++, maybe they're coding in Java or Python, your UML diagram will look the same. The only difference is how you convert that into C++ that will change. right, so your member functions, if we look, this is kind of what it looks like in UML. This is what it looks like in C++ code. We can tell that public, these are our two publics. Pay taxes doesn't have any parameters, but the return type is a bool. So if we look at our pay taxes bool, pay taxes, no parameters, return type is a bool. Catch bus, this has public, once again, it has one parameter with the return type of a void. We can see there's a void return type and with an int parameter. This one's static, so here we have a static, no parameter, return type is an address. So even if you don't even know what an address is, an address data type is, you know that that's what it returns, so that's what you could put as your return type. Here's kind of an example of the entire UML diagram and the entire code segment put together side by side so you can compare. We've got class time, there's our time class. We've got our private section here, there's private, there's our public section here, there's our public section here. So our constructor, we have a constructor with 3 parameters. Here's our constructor with 3 parameters. So you can see that this is just modeling what this is going to look like. However, this is not a particular language, and so we should be able to translate this diagram into other items and other languages. Okay, we're going to stop it here and catch us in the next video, and we're going to talk a little bit about how different classes relate to one another.